Hi all, Ed here, community leader at Persona. Super excited to have a new podcast episode for you. Today I spoke with Stuart. Stuart is a guy who knows like the RegTech, he's into FinTech, has done the first mobile payment and KYC. The guy knows a lot. He's coming from this world of how they do money transfer, payments, and he's now thinking about Web3. So it's super exciting to see someone who has done it in different countries, thinking about user journeys, KYC, and now super into the Bitcoin world, cryptocurrency. And yeah, we just had a good conversation and he's into books a lot. So I like that. Okay, so I got Stuart here with me. So Stuart, thank you so much for being here. It's awesome to have, someone who knows about the business of, everything that's happening in the Reg-Tech, Risk-Tech, Bitcoins. It's a Web3 overall, it's a super difficult market. I think a lot of people had tried to dip their toes in it, but didn't really get into it. But I'd love to learn more about you first. Who's Stuart? How did you get started with this, all this passion that you have for, fintechs and all of that? Can you tell me a little bit about you first?
Yeah, Ed. So thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Um, I've been in the fintech space for about 15 years. I think before it was even called FinTech. 2007, I joined a company called Green Dot, which had kind of rolled out a prepaid debit card at the time. And pretty quickly, we started to get into some partnerships and some projects that were really interesting. So one of those was integrating their money pack to PayPal. That was kind of a reload product. That was back in 2008. Maybe in 2012, Green Dot acquired a company that came along with Sam Altman. So that was interesting. We were working with Sam before YC and all of that. And we pioneered mobile banking. So Green Dot was maybe probably the first mobile bank, which is now kind of ubiquitous, right? So for all of those, I was doing KYC. We were doing transaction monitoring. 2017, the last thing I did at Green Dot, we stuck a debit card in your iPhone. So if you use Apple Pay Cash, we launched that. Again, I owned all of the end user onboarding, which would be your KYC, your transaction monitoring, and all of that. So it was that journey that got me into the kind of the RegTech and RiskTech world. Moved to Texas. I was there 7 years. Just recently relocated to Tampa Bay just a couple months ago, which I love. And in that move to Texas, I ended up leaving Green Dot. I worked for JP Morgan, got exposed heavily into the dispute world, which is really complex, really interesting. And there's a lot of people doing great work in that space. So I was there for a couple years. And it was, let's say, March of 21 that I kind of re-engaged Bitcoin. So at that time, Bitcoin had moved to 60K for the first time. When I had moved to Texas, I'd interviewed with a company, B4U Financial, to do kind of Bitcoin payments. It was pretty early. That was 2017. And I had a good relationship with the guys over there, Jack Williams. And so I reached out to him. And it was pretty quick that I realized, okay, well, people don't want to sell their Bitcoin. They want to be buying Bitcoin. And so kind of Bitcoin payroll as a concept popped into my brain at my kid's Little League baseball game. And so I got to working on that concept. And within maybe, 2 months or so, without getting too much into the details, I needed a US account number and a routing number to land the piece of the paycheck. That was kind of the little piece of the puzzle that I need to solve. So I reached out to some friends, and it was that reach out that led me to Rails Bank at the time, now Railser.
Mhm.
And so that conversation evolved pretty quickly to them having a global head of FinCrime role that I was kind of the perfect fit for. All that stuff that I did at Green Dot, it was that, but doing it at a global scale. So geographically, it was credit cards in the U.S., which was a great product that they had just launched. It was kind of banking and banking as a service, traditional that you guys would think of with bank accounts and transactions, payments, debit cards, and whatnot. So all of that was going on in the UK and the EU and Australia and Singapore. So it was this great footprint. So that was about 18 months ago, and that journey is sort of coming to a close now as I look to figure out what's next. But the Bitcoin space and that journey, and I've kind of plumbed and built a payroll app in that 18 months. Other companies are doing it. Obviously, there was a lot of kind of shift and uncertainty that got injected into the system maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, right? So, all of that landscape has a lot of uncertainty, and I have to navigate that. But it's kind of a side project and a passion project. But what it did is it introduced me to all of these great companies, all of these great people. And Bitcoin is a very collaborative space. So what draws me to it is that everyone that's involved is trying to help everyone else. There's, a bit of a libertarian and a vibe to it. There's a bit of a, like the proof of work, right? But people are collaborating and trying to do things, and there's not a lot of backstabbing. The community everywhere that I go. So Austin in Texas was like a great collaborative place. And I was there for maybe 6 months, right? And then I moved here, and the Tampa Bay area has a lot going on there, has a ton going on, just entrepreneurial vibe and spirit, and payments beyond banking as a service. So anyway, kind of long-winded there, but that's the last 15 years from where it started to where we are today.
Man, this is awesome. I mean, thank you so much for this. And actually, you're like the big deal. I mean, seriously, it's a lot of things that you probably, I don't know if you take it for granted, but things like, doing KYC back then, or like mobile payments, obviously like you're just walking us through this, but I imagine the challenge that it was back then. Can you maybe just share like, how was it like, because doing KYC now just feels very natural for a company like your FinTech, that's what you do. Other businesses like marketplaces are doing it as well. But how was it back then? And like, if you're talking about mobile pay, risks probably like super high, I don't know, like how was it?
That's a great question, Ed. So it has evolved a ton. Back then, there was probably a handful of solution providers in the entire world. And that was focused on the US at the time. Now, all of that was before the iPhone, right? So 2007, I think, is when iPhone 1 came out. So it was more web, the IVR that you would call in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it was a different world, but you would collect the basic information, a name, address, an SSN, and you would hit some back-end service calls, and they would say, yeah, that's a person that exists. And that was the nature of it. When I talked about GoBank, I think even in GoBank in 2012, we still didn't have driver's license that was common. Okay, so you didn't have the identity piece. But by 2017, identity was out there. So we very much had the driver's license as part of your enrollment flow. Now, what's also interesting as maybe like a dynamic between the US versus what's going on in UK and EU was that you would kind of work your way and step up the friction. Obviously, pulling out your driver's license and doing that part is a really intense friction hurdle. Mm-hmm. And there's tons of drop off, right? Like, I'm sure you've gone through it, but at that time it was if we had certain risk signals that came back, you would step up to the driver's license. Okay. And that would be rare. Maybe you would get there 5% of the time. Now it's almost that you start there, right? Especially in the crypto world or high risk, it's kind of driver's license. In the UK and Europe, you also have the liveness check, right? So now you want to make sure that the person's face in reality is the same face that's on the driver's license, and it's not, a picture that you took off of Facebook or whatever. And then the other interesting thing is as you get into the behavioral pieces. So there's kind of this balance between risk and how much information that you make the customer provide, and then what you can do with the information on the back end. But let's say like my payroll, my Bitcoin payroll company. So in theory, that's low risk. I don't want to have to put the burden of all of this verification on top of the customer. And I also might be able to draw that information in from a back-end service provider. If they log into their ADP, maybe that information can be shared with me, do it all the back-end. It's a great experience. On a high risk or maybe a lending product, there's kind of the emergence of synthetic identities, which is where people just make stuff up and they begin to build a history of that person that doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And they even start to build a credit profile or whatnot. And then they might apply for a credit card. and then they receive credit. So that's pure fraud, pure fiction. Okay, but the bad guys are really sophisticated, right? So in that sort of, you might look at the way the information's being entered and how quickly information gets entered, and there's a lot of sophistication there. So anyway, again, long-winded, but moving from just a data check, an information check against a database, through the identity that's being collected, through proving that the person on the identity is the person in real life, to proving that not only, like, I could be the person in real life, but I can make up that identity, right? So I would pass the liveness, I would pass the identity. People can make fake driver's licenses, no problem. It's getting harder, but they're out there, right? So just as the technology evolves, trying to keep up with the bad guys, it's just a chess game going back and forth. That's been going on 15 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. And as you were talking about this, I mean, I see a lot of books in your background there. So I know you're someone who's passionate about books. And I remember I was trying to find, what was the name of that book? And I think it's Ghosts in the Wires, from Kevin Mitnick. He was like this big hacker in the 80s and 90s. And he was saying, to your point, I mean, exactly what you're saying. He was just creating these social profiles and using social engineering to get through a lot of things that he wouldn't believe people would be able to do. And I think even now, like, I mean, the last, I don't know, 8 years ago or 7 years ago, when a lot of Twitter accounts were hacked, apparently it was a social hacking. It wasn't like a technical hack, was a social engineering that someone just came through in a phone call, got through an agent, got themselves like approved as, I don't know, someone who they were not claimed to be, and or probably didn't even exist, and got through, I don't know, Barack Obama's access and Elon Musk's account. That was like, I don't know, 8 years ago. But it was crazy, and I'm thinking, as you're saying, I was like, oh my God, this is like real life, like, issues. And I would imagine now with like Web3, because you're moving, like, I mean, this is to me like a completely different shift, but from this world of like IVRs, confirming who this person claims to be, to a point where we're now like in Web3, highly collaborative, traceable, even though a lot of profiles are anonymous. I mean, if you go to communities, you'll see like avatars and Discord pages with like, names that you're like, is this a real person or not? How is that now? I mean, how do you do like an onboarding journey or KYC with like Web3 now?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I think there's a lot of people trying to solve that. Web3 is really interesting because it's kind of creating the ownership bind with content, okay, or the digitization of assets. So maybe you buy an NFT, and there's a perpetual royalty that might come out of that. But also maybe think of a ride share or something like that. But Ed, you and I and 8 other people buy some type of car, and then each time someone rents that car from us, we all get a tenth. Maybe they rent it for $100 a day, and we each get $10. And then there's the interesting part about, okay, well, do we get $10 in some kind of stable coin that represents the US dollar, or does it move through the whole kind of FinTech, BaaS, embedded finance world, and $10 actually shows up in your bank account? That's kind of the interesting piece. And whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's other forms of crypto, and not all crypto is the same, and Bitcoin's different to Ethereum. They're all like very different. Some have superpowers, some will go away. But what the key piece to solve somewhere in the future is that if we identify you and we build that trust that you, Ed, are kind of this token, that verification can be applied in all of these different areas. So you don't have to go through that KYC friction of all of these different points and all of these things. So it's kind of reusable, and maybe, again, depending on how much trust that we need to have. If I'm going to send you $5, that's a different level of trust if we're going to move 5,000, or if we're doing business together and these other type of things. So anyway, somewhere in there is kind of a solution. It's really hard. Smarter people than me are working on that, but I think that the goal would be that there's different levels of trust that are built into sort of a crypto ecosystem, almost your identity, but it doesn't possess all of that PII, right? That we can extract that at somewhere. So if law enforcement needs to get it, it's over there, but it can never be hacked or stolen or these other things. And we're also layering on the proper amount of friction for this particular piece of trust that we need in a trustless environment to, like, this is really serious. And then you would collect all of the information that's possible, even all of that back end data that we're talking about on
Yeah.
behaviors and whatnot.
That makes sense. And I know you mentioned obviously Bitcoin as like one of the stable coins. Even though like stability within the crypto world is probably like a word that it's a different set of like expectations for is stable there. But on the stable coin world, I mean, you did mention that, and I think you raised a good point when you said like if it's a low risk, like a small transaction, that's a completely different game. You refer to like potentially like a payroll, for example, happening through like a crypto transaction. That's a different game. That's someone's rent on the line. That's someone's everyone coming in through that. How does that change? Your because the risk is much higher, right? So are you seeing like something happening that differs from like maybe low risk transactions that you just mentioned?
I don't know. So I'll just give you my personal view. I think
Mm-hmm.
things are really top heavy in how much verification. So it's this like baseball bat of verify who you are to just have the most basic on ramp experience. And it's not great. So you have to really have this desire to get into the crypto space, to go through all of those hurdles where maybe you just want to try it on. So I'll give you an example. This real life example, not even 2 weeks ago. So, I'm kind of looking for my next gig or exploring what's out there in the market. And I reached out to an old mentor, an old boss of mine, and we got to talking about Bitcoin. And he says, oh, Bitcoin, it's 28 grand. There's no way I can afford a Bitcoin, right? And I said, Bill, you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. So just like a dollar can be broken down into 100 pieces and you call that 100th a penny, Bitcoin can be broken down into 100 million, and that 100 millionth is called a Satoshi, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like I can send you $5 a Bitcoin right now. Let's do it. Let's get you on ramped, right? Orange pilled. And so there's an app, called Moon Wallet, MUN, and that's a really frictionless wallet. Doesn't have all of the security, but if people just want to try it on, that's the wallet I suggest because it takes literally 20 seconds to put it onto your phone, and then I can send you $5 of Bitcoin and be like, hey, you're in the game. However, he must have downloaded the wrong one because he starts going through all this KYC. Now I see him; he's got the window in the background, he's got all of this light. He looks like he's in witness protection program on our Zoom call, and he's doing it all. And I'm like, oh man, well maybe they just added that because I did this with someone 3 weeks ago and it was no problem. So anyway, he goes through the whole thing. He's taking the picture of his driver's license. He's doing all of that, and then he says, oh, it says they're going to take 24 hours to approve, right? So here it is that I'm just trying to like send this guy $5 of Bitcoin just
Mm-hmm.
to try it on. And then we're broken, right? So it took him
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes to get his wallet out, to do all of that stuff. And then even at the end, it's not like, hey, you'll be approved in a minute. A lot of them do a few minutes, right? But this one
Yeah.
says in 24
Yeah.
hours. Now, I don't know what wallet he did, but we got back in touch and I said, hey, you definitely got the wrong wallet. So he did it. He filled up his little QR code and I sent him $5 in half a second over the internet, which was pretty cool. So anyway, so I don't know where the balance is, but I'm pretty sure that we can be passing around $5 worth of Bitcoin without having to do KYC. So that's not the right solution. And if we're getting into the greater than $1,000 in a day or whatever, then there's probably a need to step that up. But even then, bad guys know how to get through KYC, which is kind of the rub, right? So you do all of this. Most people are good people, and you're putting all of this friction. But a determined bad guy knows how to beat the system. They know the technology, and they're quite crafty. Um,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the tug of war.
Yeah. No, you raise a really good point. I mean, I'm personally bullish on Bitcoin, other coins. So I kind of know a little bit about this world myself as a personal investor. And I think one thing that you probably have seen a lot is, as any businesses, you have people who are taking the opportunity to feel that, okay, this is a market that I can just take on, maybe scam a couple of people and just get away with it. On the other end, you have people who are like, oh, here's a great opportunity for me to double or three x my investments in a month because everyone is going on it and they're just seeing this on the media. And I think pre-pandemic we probably saw a lot of this because people had like money to spare and they're like, let's go for it. And it just became this over bullish market that suddenly became unrealistic, right? And that's probably across a lot of companies as well. Um, But then, to your point, it becomes that narrative of someone saying, well, because it's a new market, you don't know much, it's not regulated, that's why we got scammed. But then back to like your old days of, mobile KYC, or thinking even like about social engineering, I think people just get scammed anyways. If they want to get like fast returns, or something that's too easy, too good to be true, they're just looking for a recipe for to be scammed, right? So I don't think it's about the Web3 overall. I don't know what's your take on this.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So just a couple more stories, right? So even before Bitcoin, right, in the 2007 era that I started at Green Dot, so they were reloadable prepaid debit cards. Okay, that was their business, and the reload product was what was called a money pack. It was a piece of cardboard that hung off the shelf, and it had a little code on the back. We put some defenses around it, but you might walk up to the clerk at Rite Aid or CVS, whatever, and you would give him $200 cash. You give him an extra $5 for the product, and then this piece of cardboard would be worth $200, and you would load it onto your card. Well, that was an anonymous product at the point of purchase, and there was all kinds of scams right before crypto. So the Jamaican Lotto, someone selling a Bowflex on Craigslist, right, that didn't exist, and they'd say, "Hey, read me the code on the back, and we'll send you the product." Or, grandma, I'm in jail, and then the grandma's like, "Oh, little Johnny," right, and then they send these things. So the scams have been out there forever. It's really hard to stop people from giving away their money, and that's the problem, because they're so effective, especially in certain segments of the population. If you're a skeptical person to begin with, you'd be like, come on, right? What is this, right? But it's hard. But I've had family that's been susceptible to that. I'm sure that we all know someone. We definitely all know someone, but maybe have talked to someone that we know that's been scammed. And whatever works, even if it works on 1 out of 1,000 people, if you're sending the email or you're doing the thing and you do it 100,000 times, right, you're going to get there. So there's nothing crazy and different to crypto, in my opinion. It's very efficient. And I suppose the one thing is the difference, the protections that are built into, let's say, a credit card payment versus a crypto payment. If you have a fraudulent transaction on your credit card, right, you just go to your bank app, you push a button, and they'll give you the money, and then it's kind of on the merchant to sort that out. A little bit unfair for the merchant, but people maybe are kind of like used to just kind of spend first or send first, and like I'm protected. And crypto is not that way, right? Crypto is pretty like pure. And so that's, I think, the sharp edge there is that people might get burned giving it away. The scams are all there. They're probably bigger, but there's no recourse, right? Once that money goes, or that coin goes, it's gone. And that's like the double-edged sword, right? It's powerful because when it goes, it's complete, right? And that's a powerful transaction. But also when it goes, it's complete. If you give it away, there's no buyer's remorse. There's no protection there.
Yeah, yeah, that's spot on. Speaking of which, I mean, don't want to get my free ad here, but you obviously mentioned that you've been using Persona, and I'm curious to like, how did you find out about us, and obviously how do you see Persona playing a role in KYC, IDV, and all of this, especially in markets like, as you mentioned, like there's like risk of people just going first with like the trust before even knowing what's going on. How do you see Persona in this?
Yeah. So what was interesting is one of the first problems I had to solve at Railser when I went over there was to figure out a global KYC solution that would support all of those regions that I mentioned earlier, as well as a transaction monitoring solution. You kind of call that FRAML, which is fraud and AML. And I had the luxury to go out and basically canvas and interview and demo all of the different providers out there that were worthwhile worldwide. Okay, so more than a dozen, less than 2 dozen kind of things. So it's a pretty crowded space now. Some groups do things better than others. For me, what I realized is there wasn't one solution to cover everyone. There were really good solutions in the US that were expanding globally. There were global solutions that were good elsewhere, and some of them might have, again, a bit of a superpower in certain areas or regions within Europe. Singapore was different to Australia, so there wasn't like an APAC region. They had certain players that were doing their thing. And so anyway, so that was interesting, but I really got to recognize the landscape. And so also with meeting all of these people, I made a lot of connections, just networking and meeting great people doing great things in their particular space. And I'm not a great pen pal, but you might meet up at a Money 2020 or in this case, I think it was Bitcoin Miami last year. And so there's a gal that works for Persona, Sarah Rosewitz, who I was friends with. And so we just got to talking a couple months ago. And I said, hey, how are you doing? And was talking a little bit about this payroll app. And anyway, she just talked about your program, how you're friendly to startups and whatnot. And so, it made a lot of sense. A lot of these other players are bigger. They're looking for minimums. They're looking for commitments. And again, maybe in a future time frame, all of that makes sense. But really, if you're just plumbing something and you're kind of doing it as, sort of a project while you have a day job, you're not ready to make those bigger commitments. And it was just a really easy way to get started.
That's awesome. I mean, it's great to hear that. And well, big kudos to Sarah for making the intros. I think that validates the power of networking as well. And I mean, I hope it's been great for you. I mean, I know you're like part of the community, and I'm hoping that things that you're getting out of Persona, we have this opportunity to have Persona offered for free for startups and smaller businesses, which is, as you said, something that's like lower risk. Again, you can get started, you can see how it works. Maybe we're going to solve all the needs you have, hopefully. But I know that international markets, different needs are, they have its own peculiarities. So it's not going to be one size fits all, but happy to, be a voice for you to our product team and share your feedback if you have any as well.
Yeah, well, again, I mean, right now it's just very early on, but I'm enjoying the people that I'm meeting through the network. It's a dynamic place and space, and you guys have the ways to pick your own journeys and to layer on that friction that we talked about. And so it's just an early relationship, but it's nice. I'm happy to be a part of the community, and always happy to provide feedback. And make the world a safer, better place.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. And before we just wrap in, I want to make sure that people can find you, if they want to follow your work or, be in touch for opportunities, maybe, I don't know, getting consulting gigs with you. Before we get to that, I saw a lot of the books there at the back, and I'm super curious to maybe have a favorite one or a couple of favorite ones, but is there a book you would recommend to someone either getting started, a book that you just like, that you personally feel like, oh, that's a great book, I just think people should read this?
Well, I think my favorite book of all time is 1984. So, I mean, that's
George Orwell. Yeah,
quite relevant right now. Yeah, I think another one, maybe it's probably a little bit dated, but there's some books around the 80-20 principle. It's pretty good as well. I think there's so much to go around. Just kind of think about where you can get 80% of the value out of 20% of your work. Is just a really important kind of mindset, whether you take it into your product and whether it's prioritization, or again, if we're thinking about risk and these type of things, or even in your life, right? That there's probably only so much time in your day, and maybe you would get 80% of kind of the enjoyment from hanging out with fewer people, spending time with family or close friends, and kind of making some tough choices. So, I think just throw a couple ideas out there.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, a big fan of both. I mean, 1984, I literally have a tattoo here of 1984.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, that's it.
Good for you,
and yeah, man, I'm big into, I love books too. I think I'm due to join like some book club or some sort of like, discussion based book, but I love that. And yeah, the Pareto principle of the 80-20, I get that all the time. I mean, I probably wear 80%, 20% of my wardrobe 80% of the time, and I think that applies to a lot of things in life.
Oh, absolutely. Well, right. I mean, for now, I'm just kind of doing the black T-shirt thing, so we really cut that one down.
Few days, Stevie Jobs, kind of like going for like low profile.
Get out in the real world. I got some dress shirts and a dress like that.
I hear you. Yeah. So, Stuart, where can people find you? Like, is there like a preferred channel that you want people to go follow you, follow your work?
Well, I think for now, just find me on LinkedIn. So that's where I'm at. That's the safest place. I don't do a ton of other social. Again, I'm not kind of out there with my own personal brand, but it is a goal of mine as well to just expose myself a little bit, have conversations like we are today, and hopefully, again, that things that I know or people that I've met, kind of my network, can help other people in some way, and just try to kind of add value for people taking the time to take a listen or to come and find me.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for your time. I'll make sure to put your LinkedIn profile at the description of this interview. And again, great having you here. Great having you in the community. And let's stay in touch. I mean, we can talk about several things. I'm up into a lot of these things that you mentioned. I'm like, yeah, I'm keen to like learn more from you on that. So great having this
Absolutely.
conversation.
Well,
Yeah.
ping me anytime, and maybe we can start a little book club. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Thanks a lot, Stu. Have a
Okay.
great day, man.
Thanks, Ed.
Bye
You
bye.
too. Bye bye.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you enjoyed. So if you liked it, make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Join our community. You can go to withpersona.com/community and you can join us. It's free. And we got a lot of people there, super interesting founders, business owners, product managers, people who just care about identity, about trust, about managing identities online. Yeah, and so if that's a space that you feel like joining, please make sure you subscribe and join us on the community. Okay? So I'll see you. Take care.